Hello everyone, Liukugo here. Welcome to my very first Patreon drawing video. I'm stoked today because I've been looking forward to making this for a while. If you'd like to support my work, you can follow me on Patreon, but don't worry, I'll still be posting on YouTube as usual. The free YouTube version will stay as my normal time-lapse videos, which are quick to watch. But on Patreon, you'll get the full real-time drawing. I usually draw anywhere from 2 to 4 hours for a piece like this, and this one took me about 2.5 hours. In the real-time version, you'll see every step unfold, so it's much easier to follow along. And since this is my first drawing video on Patreon, I'm sharing the thought process here on YouTube in the form of a time-lapse. This voiceover is the shorter version of what I share in full on my Patreon. In the Patreon video, I'll break the real-time footage into smaller chapters. At the start of each chapter, I'll give a short explanation about the goal for that section, what I'm focusing on and why, so you can follow along without me talking non-stop for hours. Usually, when I draw, I'm listening to my favorite game soundtracks, so in these real-time sections, I can stay fully focused on the artwork while still giving you clear, concise guidance where it matters most through voiceover. In Patreon, I also share the reference photo I'm using, so it's much easier to follow along. But no worries, if you're watching on YouTube and want to try following along, you still can. Just take a screenshot of my finished drawing and use that as your reference instead. About the materials I'm using, I've listed everything in the description box, so check that if you want to use the exact same tools. So thank you for even considering supporting me here and in Patreon. It really does make a huge difference and keeps me going, both as an artist and as a creator. Alright, so let's jump in. As you can see here, I'm starting the drawing by sketching some straight lines. These are my simplified version of the subject, and by simplified, I mean I'm aiming for straight strokes instead of curves at this stage. I'm not sketching everything right now, just the big important shapes. If you're not sure where to start, try squinting your eyes. This will help you see only the strongest edges, and those are the ones you want to put down first. After the sketching stage is done, we move into one of my favorite parts, the shading stage. This is where the drawing really starts to gain some depth, even though we're still keeping things very simple. At this point, the goal is to divide the entire drawing into just two values, light and dark. That's it. No midtones yet, no soft transitions, just those two values. Think of it as creating a very stripped down version of the final piece, where everything is reduced to its simplest form. I like to imagine I'm building a shadow cutout, almost like the whole drawing is one big silhouette. By committing early to which areas will be in shadow and which will stay light, I can keep the composition clear and avoid getting lost later. For this stage, I'm using my Willow charcoal. I love it because it's soft, it covers a large area quickly, and it's really easy to adjust if I need to. I'll block in the shadow areas first, making sure they connect together in a way that feels natural. Once the big shapes are filled in, I gently smudge the shaded areas with my finger. This smooths out the texture and gives me an even base to work from. Even though it's a very simplified step, it's actually one of the most important. If the light and shadow shapes work well here, the rest of the drawing will have a strong foundation to build on. After the previous light and dark stage, there's still one important thing missing, the middle value. Right now, the drawing only has two values, so it can look a bit too flat. That's why the first thing I do here is smudge everything with my hand. By doing that, I can very quickly bring in that soft in-between tone. If you look closely at the light areas in real life, they're rarely pure white. There's usually some subtle shading happening. And honestly, it's much faster to just smudge everything lightly, like this, than to try and shade each area individually. This step also has another benefit. It smooths out the drawing. The texture from the earlier shading becomes softer and more even, which makes it much easier to layer on darker tones later without fighting against a rough surface. Once that soft base is in place, I pick up my blending stump and start darkening certain areas even more. I usually begin with the background right next to the face, because I want to create that strong contrast. A light face against a dark background, that instantly makes the portrait pop forward. From there, I move back into the facial features. This is where I carefully redraw everything, but now using a darker value and paying more attention to refinement. Lines that were just rough guides before are now sharpened, curves are adjusted, and little details like the edges of the eyes, nose, and lips become more defined. The same approach goes for the hair and the winter clothing. I don't rush, I darken them slowly, building up the value with just the blending stump. This way, the strokes stay soft, but the tones become deeper and more solid. By the time this step is finished, the drawing now has a complete value set. The brightest highlights, the light areas, the middle tones, the middle dark tones, and the deepest darks. That's 5 distinct values, and honestly, this alone is already enough to achieve a realistic look. But of course, I'm not stopping here. Even though the values are in place, there's still so much more I can do to push the realism further, and that's exactly what I'm going to do in the next stage. This stage is all about pushing the dark values further. Up until now, the drawing has been mostly about laying down the basic shapes, establishing the light and dark areas, and then filling in the middle tones and some basic shadow. Now, it's time to deepen certain areas, so the image really starts to gain more presence. For this, I switch over to my pencil charcoal. This one is from Marie's and graded neutral. Technically, that means it's supposed to be a middle dark tone, but in my experience, it's already plenty dark for what I need. I personally don't like taking the darks all the way to the deepest black. That's because I want to keep a soft, hand-drawn look in the final piece. If the darks are pushed too far, the portrait can start looking more like a photograph than a drawing, and that's not the mood I'm going for here. I begin by darkening the facial features first. To me, the face is the focal point of any portrait, and it deserves the most attention. I carefully go over the eyes, the nose, the lips, all the areas that carry expression, making sure to refine the shapes as I darken them. Before moving on, I take a moment to check the overall balance of the darks I've added so far. I don't randomly place dark values everywhere. Instead, I work my way outward from the central area, the face. Once I'm happy with the contrast in the face, I start thinking ahead. I plan out where I'll place the next darker tones, keeping in mind which areas should stay soft, so the viewer's attention doesn't drift away from the main subject. This way, the drawing develops in a controlled, intentional way, rather than just filling in every dark space at once. Now that the face is at a good stopping point, I'm moving on to the hair and the winter clothing. Even though these areas are totally different textures compared to skin, I'm still thinking in the same way as before, starting with the big shapes first, and then slowly refining them. I don't jump into small details right away. This keeps the structure solid and stops me from getting lost in tiny areas that don't really matter yet. Before I get too far, I'll mention something you might notice if you compare this to the reference photo. I've adjusted her features in a way that makes her look slightly younger. It's subtle, but it comes from a few deliberate changes. I softened the jawline so it flows into the neck without that sharper edge you see in the photo. I made the nose just a little smaller and rounder, and I kept the skin extremely smooth without adding any lines or texture that might break up the surface. These little adjustments changed the impression of the portrait, making it feel gentler, softer, and more delicate overall. These are my own interpretations of the image. In this portrait, I don't want to copy the reference exactly, and I'm not trying to draw a portrait of the person in the reference photo. This way, the drawing feels more about me and my drawing, with the photo reference serving only as a mere inspiration. When it comes to the hair, I'm not drawing every single strand. That would take forever, and honestly, it's not even necessary. Instead, I group the hair into larger shapes of light and shadow. I think of it almost like sculpting, carving out the areas where the light hits, and then letting the shadow shapes define the rest. I place these shapes carefully so that they explain the form without overcomplicating it. If you get these big shapes right, the viewer's brain will automatically fill in all the strands you didn't draw. The same approach works perfectly for the winter clothing. Fur can be especially tricky because your first instinct might be to try and draw all the little hairs sticking out, but that just makes it look messy and overworked. Instead, I think about it as clumps or tufts, each with its own light and shadow. I let the silhouette of the fur do a lot of the work. Breaking up the edge into irregular soft shapes instantly makes it feel fluffy. Then I suggest the inner texture with a few well-placed dark accents and lighter smudges. When interpreting an image, I feel like the drawing becomes more about me and my own artistic voice, rather than just a test of whether I can copy the reference perfectly. That doesn't mean I'm unable to copy exactly like the reference. In fact, I've done plenty of that in the past, especially for commission work, where capturing the exact likeness of a specific person is the priority. In those cases, there's very little room for interpretation, and the goal is pure accuracy. But in a piece like this, I want more freedom. I decide where to add detail and where to hold back. For me, the face gets the highest level of detail because it's the focal point, and everything outside of that, like the hair, the winter clothing, and the background, gets softer, more abstract treatment. Also, when you try to copy a photograph exactly, it can sometimes make the drawing feel a little stiff or lifeless. By combining realistic rendering with more abstract, suggestive shapes, you give the artwork more personality. It's that push and pull between accuracy and looseness that keeps the viewer's eye engaged and makes the piece feel more like a living artwork, rather than just a frozen copy of a photo. Now that I'm moving on to the winter clothing, I'm using directional strokes that follow the shape of the fabric. I like to work from the darkest values first, and then gradually transition into the lighter areas. If any section feels too rough or too abstract, I soften it by blending in a middle value shading. This is one of those parts where it really helps to step back and look from a distance. You'll catch imbalances and see how the textures read overall. And here's something I want to share. Interpretation doesn't always have to be a big, dramatic change. Even something small, like how you choose to render a coat, or the way you simplify a fold, is already your own artistic voice coming through. The reference is just a starting point. You don't have to copy every wrinkle or stitch. These little decisions add personality, and over time, they're what make your work feel unmistakably yours. For the background, I'm darkening it gradually, always stepping back to check the overall balance of the piece. Looking from afar helps me avoid flatness and see if the background is truly supporting the portrait, rather than competing with it. I also make sure the edges of the hair and the clothing blend naturally into the background, so nothing feels like it's been cut out and pasted on. A background doesn't always need to be dramatic or full of detail. Sometimes, something as simple as a clean, dark backdrop is enough to complement a soft-looking portrait like this. It's about letting the subject breathe while still giving it a frame that enhances the mood. Reflecting on this piece, I'm reminded how much subtle choices can change the feeling of a drawing, whether it's the balance of values, the softness of an edge, or the decision to keep things simple. These are the things that grow with practice, and over time, they become second nature. So the drawing is done now. Hope you guys have a great weekend and keep at it with your drawing. Even if it feels slow sometimes, every little bit adds up, and before you know it, you'll be surprising yourself.